Eulogy for Geordie Baird. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be asked by the family to provide a tribute at this sad time. On the death of a close family friend, Robert Burns penned these lines. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. I cannot think of two finer lines to open the tribute to Geordie Baird, the man, the farmer, the husband of Hazel, the father of George, the father-in-law of Linda, the grandfather of Reese, the good friend of many, the good neighbour, and a lifelong Lichties supporter. He was born on the 21st of February 1935 and christened George, but like most of us here today, we all knew him as Geordie. The name George has Greek origins from the name Georgos, which means a tiller of the soil, a farmer. How good is that to have a name which sums up the man, his work, his life, his destiny? Thank goodness back then that Henry and Edith knew nothing of today's fashion of naming children after places like Brooklyn, Chelsea, Madison. Otherwise Geordie might well have been called Peasy Hill, Swirlburn, or even Bilmirmer. I wondered how the name Geordie could be used to form a tribute to the man. For me, the G in Geordie would stand for generosity. He was generous in nature, generous in spirit, and generous of the time he gave to others. The E in Geordie would stand for enthusiasm. He had a strong work ethic, being born into a family, a time, a generation where hard work was just the order of the day. Even after he retired from the farm and his other farming part-time jobs, he would get up of a morning, put on his bib and brace overalls and expect to work, because he needed to, because it gave him a sense of worth and this was his way of making his contribution. The O for me would stand for open, and he was honest and open. He was an honest man through and through, and he was open and very honest in his conversations, and as some of us know to our cost, he could be brutally honest. But what you saw was what you got, and what you got was what he thought, whether you liked it or liked it not. As a Lichties supporter, he was one of that group who changed ends at half-time to be behind the opposition goal to catch all the action. I'm sure in the decades he spent supporting his team, he must have been sair disappointed some days. I would be standing in the queue for my pie and bovril, and he would come over for a crack and a catch-up. Sometimes it would go like this. Well, well, Mr. Ramsay, and what's best with you the day? I see you've gotten that face of yours in the papers again this week. Must have been a slow news week at the Courier, was it? Geordie and Hazel loved their Saturday night supper dances at the Meadowbank. It was a highlight of their week. He once told me the worst night he ever had at the Meadowbank was the one and only night I ever played there. Now, to be fair, the band had cancelled on the Saturday lunchtime, and the Meadowbank phoned me to say that they were fully booked and could I help. Well, I managed to get a drummer, and we did the gig. But we didn't play dance music, we did cabaret and sing-along songs. At the end of the evening, Mr. Baird made it abundantly clear that in his considered opinion, the standard of entertainment that night was far below his expectations. Now, Geordie didn't use these exact words, but I will just let you use your imagination as to how he put that message across. Despite that night, he would often ask where and when I was playing, and he would ask it in his own inimitable style. Aye, aye, Mr. Ramsay, still roaring and bawling your head off up at the Viewfield, are you? It was about Geordie's honesty that his friend Dave Ritchie pointed me to the words of Robert Burns, where he said, the honest man, though e'er so poor, is king of men for a' that. The R in Geordie would stand for resilience. Family and friends were heartened by the way Geordie had to adapt to the life-changing effects of Hazel's illness and eventually his sad loss of Hazel in 2010. He then had to adapt to shopping, cooking, cleaning and managing the house, which had all been done for him. Geordie was a man's man, born into a family and a time where the roles in men and women were very different from today. I remember being at Craigend when old Henry came in for his supper, sat down at his chair at the range with his two dogs at the side of his chair. My Auntie Edith knelt down and unlaced his boots and took them off. I told that story to George and Linda last week, and Linda was quick off the mark to point out that that would not be happening any time soon at Antiquary Gardens. I think some of Geordie's honesty must have rubbed off on Linda. The D in Geordie would stand for determined. If he was going to do something, he would stick with it and see it through to the end. In his conversations, he would be determined to get his point across, pointing his finger and saying, "Now look you here." Geordie was not always right, but in Geordie's opinion, he was never wrong. And let's remember that in his family and true friendships, he never bore a grudge. Again, Dave Ritchie, in summing up his relationship with Geordie, pointed to the words which Burns wrote on his father's death. For even his failings leaned to virtue's side. The I in Geordie would stand for independent, fiercely independent. Geordie and his family didn't live in each other's pockets, but always knew that they would be there for each other if needed. Again, Geordie valued his independence and his independent opinion, never being easily swayed. The E in Geordie would stand for earnest. In his friendships with his Loughlin's pals on a Thursday or his Friday night session with Dave Ritchie and sometimes Eck Whitten, Geordie would be earnest in any and many debates and was passionate about all things farming, football and politics, and sometimes that got quite heated, I believe. I liked Dave's summary of Geordie when he said of him, "A man with a tough shell, but a soft centre." As a man under the star sign of Pisces, some of the characteristics of Piscean man are listed as follows. Generous of nature, a well-defined set of friends, spending time with friends who make you laugh, can communicate across the generations, which you could see in the special two-way relationship between Rhys and his grandad, with 60 years between them. Seldom holds a grudge, often giving what they never had, and they treasure their family and friends. Are these not the very characteristics we admired in Geordie? He had a good sense of humour, often getting up to practical jokes, and on one occasion, with Andy Boy Mitchell, going up to Dave's farm while Dave was sleeping, and jacking up his van and taking all the wheels off. That is probably one of the reasons why he liked and laughed uproariously at Victor and his gang in Still Game. He also had a wicked sense of humour. I remember being at Craigend one day, and he said, well, young Ramsay, we'll need to get you working, but you'll better take off that good jacket you've got on." I said to Geordie, "Where will I put it?" He said, "Just hang it on the fence." So I did. But what Geordie forgot to tell me was it was an electric fence. So thank you, Geordie, for my very first electric shock. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the hymn sheet from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that they spent alive on earth, and now only those who loved them know what that little line is worth. Geordie was born at Craigend, and for the rest of his working days until he reached 65, Craigend was his home, his work, and his family. Growing up during the war years, there would have been little in the way of luxuries at Craigend. And it was at Craigend where Dave Ritchie and Geordie first met, as Dave was a shepherd's lad and would bring the sheep down from Glenshee to the low ground for the winter, and some would be wintered at Craigend. He attended Arbroath School and then Arbroath High School and left at 15 to follow in his father's footsteps to work on the farm. At the age of 17, he bought a motorbike, which led to him being involved in a serious accident and hospitalised in Arbroath Infirmary and being out of action for 3 months. A few years ago, my sister Edna was visiting Australia, following up some relatives in her family tree, and at a dinner party was a woman who had been a nurse in Arbroath and had nursed Geordie after his accident. Geordie loved that story. Hazel and Geordie were married in 1962 and George was born the year after. Linda and George were married in 1985 and then Reese came along. Geordie was fiercely proud of his family and delighted to see them making a success of their lives. Geordie was a lifelong Lichty supporter, and on his 80th birthday he received a letter of acknowledgement of his loyalty to the club from the then club chairman, John Christensen. The letter was read out by Eck Whitten at Geordie's 80th birthday bash. That letter became a prized possession for him. Another connection with the club for Geordie was with present chairman Mike Caird, as George and Mike played together for the lads club, and Geordie and Mike's dad helped out with the running of the club for a short time. And it is a measure of respect for Geordie that Chairman Mike Caird is here today to pay his respects. Another great moment which Geordie talked about was that he was at my birthday party at Gayfield last year when the directors of the club brought in the League Cup, which Arbroath had just won that afternoon, and everyone got the chance to hold the cup and get photographs taken. He loved that. It is a measure of the respect for Geordie that the club flew the flag at half-mast at Gayfield on Saturday and will do the same again today as Geordie makes his last journey past his beloved Gayfield. He has a tribute and a photograph of his football pals on the Arbroath Football Club website, with many tributes being sent in about him and condolences to George, Linda and Reese. You will have your own memories and stories about Geordie, and if he had any message for us today, I think it would be along these lines. Do the best with what you've got, with the best of who you've got, for as long as you've got. In conclusion, Burns wrote a poem called A Bottle and a Friend, and it just seems proper and fitting for today, and I am sure Geordie would have echoed the words of Burns when he said, "Then catch the moments as they fly, and use them as you ought, man. Believe me, happiness is shy, and comes not aye when sought, man." To a life well loved, and a life well lived, our man, Geordie Baird.